Welcome again to Balmer's Workshop. It is always great to have you back. Last time we started the build of this bumper by making some lower brackets, and then we cut a center section of the bumper out, and we cut a spare tire relief out of that center section. We mocked it into place at the right height. We made some upper mounts, welded those mounts to the vehicle, and created through holes in the bumper so that we could install it onto those mounts. And then we welded up our lower mounts in place so that the center section was all solidified and ready to go. And now we can go ahead and create the rest of the bumper. A good morning to you. It's been a couple of weeks for me since I have worked on this vehicle. The job went a little bit overtime on me, and I had other projects coming up, so the customer was kind enough to take the vehicle away for a couple of weeks and bring it back to me now to finish the job. So I think I showed you these mounts that I created, these gusseted mounts with captive nuts in behind the last time, but we'll give you just a quick tour of that again. And the customer has also added a VHF cable in there for his radio, and this little antenna base is going to be mounted into the bumper, so I'll make a hole for that and mount it. But most importantly, I believe where we left off last time was with the center section of the bumper here, and I had only tacked it all together and tacked some mounts to it. Now I have completed it for the most part, the center section that is, and what I've done to do that is I've welded these tubes in place, and these are what allow me to pass a socket through there to mount the bumper to the vehicle, of course. And I have also fully welded the spare tire recess and plated it, of course. I'll bring you around here to show you that. Nicely plated, and I've blended out the tops and left the welds in place. I don't think I'll blend those out. They're nice looking welds, and I don't see any reason to blend them out. So now what I'm going to do is add the receiver. I've obviously already plasma cut the hole for that, and you can see how tight that went. I can just barely fit it in the space that I have allowed, but it's perfectly centered and good to go. The way that I want to mount my receiver is with 1/4 inch of the receiver tube protruding out of the back side of the bumper and the rest out of the front, of course. So what I've done is I've added some 1/4 inch spacers and then a little bridge plate over those to give myself the correct back spacing. I'll take this center section out of the vise now, and I'll show you how I did that, and then we'll pop it back in and weld everything up. So you can see that what I did is I just laid some 1/4 inch plates here and here to give myself the correct spacing. I put a little 3/16 flat bar bridge over top of that and clamped everything into place. And that way I've got a 1/4 inch gap between the back side of the bumper and the front side of this bridge. So therefore, when I place my receiver tube, it's going to be correctly backspaced, as you can see there. So we'll flip this over, put it back in the vise, make sure everything's nice and square, and then we'll weld it up. All right, so now we'll remove the spacers and this bridge plate, 1/4 inch spacer. Bridge plate, 1/4 inch spacer. And that leaves me with a perfect 1/4 inch back spacing on my receiver, and it's dead straight, so now I can tack all 4 corners on this side as well. I know it won't move, and I can create my safety chain plate for safety chains to go to when you're towing. And that is the next step. So I made up my safety chain plate with some 1-inch holes in it, and now I am just gonna clamp it underneath the receiver, make sure it's perfectly centered, and then tack it into place, and I can weld up the whole assembly. portions of the bumper all nicely blended out, and I'm happy with the radius that I've created. It's time to attach these portions to the center section of the bumper. Now, when I originally cut the center section of the bumper, I cut a 12-degree angle on each end, and that's the angle, obviously, that I want these to follow. And there's a couple of things that I need to be concerned about when I mount them up. Obviously, my vertical positioning is critical, so in order to get that correct, I've just cut myself a little piece of flat bar, which I'm going to tack to the bottom of the bumper. That way I can set this portion on top of it, and I know that my vertical positioning will be correct. And I'm also going to use a pair of angle welding clamps. Right now they're set to 90 degrees, but obviously I'll adjust them to 12, and they'll go in behind the bumper, and they'll clamp this section in place so that I've got 12 degrees bang on, and also so that I have about a 3/16 gap so that I've got the appropriate weld prep to run a nice bead in there and get good penetration in my weld. So before I go any further here, I should point out something. When you're using these angle clamps, they're fantastic. They can be set anywhere from 0 or 180 degrees up to 90 or even past 90, I believe. Once they're locked into position, they're very solid, and they work great to get everything tacked together. I can confirm here that I'm at 12 degrees. And I certainly am. You won't be able to see that on the camera, but I am at 12 degrees. But one thing when you're using these clamps that I want to point out that's really critical is so that you wind up with these surfaces being exactly flush, you've got to have them positioned left or right, exactly right, and you've got to kind of play with that a little bit. You'll see that I'm actually not on the center of the joint. The center of the joint, of course, projects forward from this point here, so I'm considerably off of that. So you just want to play with it. It depends on the angle that you're setting, where you're going to wind up positioned in terms of the relationship between the gap that you have between your two pieces and the actual center point of your clamp. That's going to change depending on the angle that you're creating. So you just have to play with that and make sure that you've got these lined up really flush. Otherwise, obviously, you're going to have a real issue later on. What you'll wind up having to do if you're slightly off is blend down the one portion to match so that you create a nice smooth curve. Only when you do that, what you're going to do is you're actually going to change the location of that angle. It's going to move slightly, so you'll be a little bit asymmetrical if you go that way. So you want to always try to make sure that your surfaces are dead flush so that you have good symmetry when you finish up your project. See that my straight edge is decently straight all the way along. Got a nice line there. Of course, we're lined up at the bottom thanks to my tacked on little piece of flat bar there. I have used a screwdriver, a slot screwdriver, to open up my gap so that it was even the whole way along for weld prep. I can remove that now. And our 12-degree angle has been maintained. And we're good to go. So I think this side of the bumper is ready. I certainly won't weld it fully at this point. We'll just fit it to the vehicle once I have done exactly the same thing over on the other side. side portions, or wings as I often call them, are now welded on, tack welded in place. I've left those little plates on the bottom for now. I'll cut them off next time when I turn the bumper upside down. But it's fitting up really nicely to the back of the vehicle. I'm very happy with the fit up itself, and now I've got to fill all these gaps that you see and cover all the areas that need covering. So in order to get all this sheet metal covered up and looking good, I've started with a Coroplast mock-up. With the square tube, of course, we don't do mock-ups for that. I just basically calculate my angles, cut away, and make adjustments as necessary. But when we're going to be dealing with plate or sheet metal, I definitely like to use Coroplast mock-ups first. It makes things much faster and much less waste. So that's the basic idea of the side of the bumper. I've built a couple of these before. This vehicle has a 2-inch body lift, which makes it more challenging, or makes it a little different, I should say, rather than more challenging. But basically, I can use a lot of the templates as they were, and this is one of the ones that will more or less work. I've had to adjust it a little bit, but not too much. What I'm going to do is put an angled portion up here, which is contoured to go around the flare, and then obviously I'll cap this back area. So anyway, that's the idea. There's the Coroplast piece, and from that I cut a couple of 10 gauge steel pieces. So there it is in place. And again, we'll have a portion up here to fill this, and then a boxed in area around there. I will likely cut this off as well, because this vehicle has a pretty aggressive lift kit on it and quite large tires, and I would really hate for that point to ever contact the tire. And there is a slim chance that could happen. I don't really have the facilities to flex this thing out completely. I mean, I could borrow the neighbor's forklift the way that I did with my big truck that I sold, if you've seen that video, but I don't really want to be bugging the neighbors constantly for forklift usage, and I don't really want to be flexing the vehicle out if I don't have to. So we'll probably just play it safe, and pending customer approval, we'll cut along this line here, and this X'd out area will be removed. So I think I'm going to tack this in place now, and then start laying some Coroplast mock-up pieces in place to fill in the rest of this area. So when you're wanting to shape Coroplast, like here, I cut this out with a razor knife, and it's really not very smooth. I've got a really rough little bump right there, and I'd like to make a nice smooth radius. Using a grinder with a blending disc on it works well, or you could use a flapper wheel on a die grinder, or any sort of a sanding flapper type of an arrangement will work well for that purpose. And there you go. So there's some marker line on there which makes it look a bit rough, but if I turn it over to this side and clean off any of the excess, you'll see that it's a much smoother line now. So just a little tip. So here's the first angled top piece that I had made, and it fit up quite well, only I found that I needed a little bit more material in here. The gap here was just a little larger than I wanted, and I went a little long, but otherwise it worked out really well. So I just copied this onto another piece, and I obviously just changed my line a little bit to give myself a little bit more material in here to bring that gap narrower. And then I've just laid some green painter's tape on the back side of this guy, so that way I can lay it in place here, get my edges perfectly lined up and flush, get my tape set into place, and then I can bend that down on my angle. There we go. Now we have a nice even gap. And having the tape on the back side is definitely the way to go. If I had it on the front side, it would be super resistant to bending at all. And then when it did bend, probably it would tear the tape. In this case, it bends really nicely, and in fact, it will even kind of hold the angle just based on the stiffness of the tape. So there you go. I'll take you off the tripod so you can have a better look at this contour. There's what I've come up with. Now, because we have, let me just move the tripod out of the way here. Because we have an angle this way, as well as a contour, and that contour is trying to match something which isn't on the same angle, we're going to have, depending on where you look at it from, the gap is going to change slightly. So you can see as we go over here, It's not absolutely exactly the same look from every angle, but it's very, very close. So I'm quite happy with that. I might remove a tiny bit of material from the very end there. You can see it gets a bit close to the fender flare. It doesn't actually come close to touching, but it just kind of looks a bit awkward from up here at standing height. So I may alter that, but otherwise I'm quite happy with that. So now I'm going to start working on filling in this back area. All right, so there is the finished back plate, and it's fit up really nicely. Of course, I do still have a little gap in here. Oops, sorry for the camera work. A little gap in here, but there's just not a whole lot I can do about that. If I go too close, then when there's any flex between the bumper and the body, we're going to wind up hitting that tail light. So I have kept a decent gap, as you can see there as well. And I've cut an angle on this inside here so that it looks nice and straight, as you can see by the square, according to the, in line with the tail light, which is covered right now, but you get the picture. So there you are. Fits fairly well, and I'm quite happy with that. Now I'll make a plate to fill in this area, make sure that the door still opens without any interference, and I can pretty much start turning that into steel. And that brings to a close part 2 in this series of the rear bumper build for a Suzuki Grand Vitara or Escudo or Chevrolet Tracker, depending on what part of the world you live in and what model you have. Thanks for joining me. I think we got a lot accomplished in this one. Please do come back for part 3, where we will get it completely finished up. We'll add the top plate, we will remove the bumper from the vehicle, fully brace it, weld it, sand out those welds, blend them, and get it looking really awesome. And then we'll send it out for sandblast, priming, and powder coating, and we'll get it installed on the vehicle. A huge thanks to all of you who have commented, liked, and most importantly subscribed lately. That's the best way to support my channel, so please do subscribe if you like the content, and stay tuned for much more coming up soon. Thanks again for joining me here at Balmer's Workshop.